Hey gang, Larry Vickers here. Welcome to the very first Larry Vickers podcast presented to you by Firearms Trainers Association. I've been wanting to do podcasts for a while now. It took a while to get all the bits and pieces into place. FTA stepped up to the plate to be the presenting sponsor. Special thanks. And the goal here is to kind of dig deeper into some of the firearms that you guys see on my social media, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, or some of my YouTube videos. I kind of want to get a longer format and talk a little bit more into the weeds, a little bit more into the detail, kind of like along the lines I do in my classes. We're going to kick it off with the 1911. I have a long history with this pistol. I used it when I was in Delta Force in the late 80s and into the 1990s and early 2000s. Also customized them as a hobby. Really don't have time to do that anymore because if you work on these things, they take tons of time to get them right. I also teach gunsmith classes and also go around the United States and teach 2-day operator classes on the 1911. And I'm proud to say I've got a Vickers Elite Edition 1911 series with Wilson Combat, and this happens to be one right here in 9mm. This happens to be a Commander one I just got for my pile with a lightweight rail, aluminum frame, lightweight rail frame up front here in 9mm Commander setup, Vickers Elite Edition. Now I've got a couple other 1911s on the table. We're going to talk about those here in a little bit. I just kind of want to do an overview on the 1911. Why is it so popular, and kind of give you some of my pointers. Some of my students from my classes will recognize some of these talking points, and so let's dig right into it. First off, why is the 1911 so popular? Well, in this day and age, it's the most popular single stack pistol in the world. Any other pistol that is single stack is nowhere near as popular as the 1911. If you think about it, all its contemporaries, all the other pistols that are very popular, whether it be Glock, HK, SIG, Beretta, whatever it may be, they're all generally much higher capacity. As a general rule, twice the capacity approximately as the 1911. So why is this gun still that popular? Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, more than anything, it has to be the trigger. The trigger on the 1911 is still the gold standard for auto-loading service pistols to this day. The take-up, the reset, the trigger break, frankly, is outstanding. Like I said, still the benchmark to this day. All those other pistols, as well as many others, compare themselves to the 1911. So the trigger, right off the bat, is still what everybody measures themselves against. The other thing about the 1911, very inherently accurate pistol, and a pistol they cracked the code on making it accurate a long time ago. All right, we know as long as you follow a certain format, A, B, C, D, E, you'll end up with a pistol that is very accurate. Flip side is generally not a weapon that is tolerant of a wide variety of ammunition as other pistols. So this is a gun that you've got to kind of raise your game if you're an end user and you like the 1911. You got to stay more on top of maintenance. You got to stay more on top of keeping the gun lubed. You got to stay more on top of what magazines and what ammo I'm using in the gun, because it's not nearly so forgiving as a lot of the newer guns are. On top of all that, it's a much slimmer gun. Now, it's a single stack, but it's a gun that you can really tailor to your hand size. If you have large hands or medium-sized hands or small hands, you have the ability to tailor this gun to your hand size very easily. Obviously, different grip thicknesses on the side, flat mainspring housing versus arched. You also have a long trigger option, so you've got the ability to make the gun bigger or smaller depending on your hand size. That's something that can contribute greatly in somebody's ability to shoot the gun effectively. Now, that being said, what I run into all the time is the classic scenario. Back in the day, when I started, everybody shot 1911s and then kind of transitioned to other pistols like Glocks. Now it's the opposite. You got guys who cut their teeth on a Glock, and then they decide, you know what, I'm into handguns, I really like shooting them. Let me try this 1911 thing and see what this is all about. Well, they're kind of going back in time. All right, they're going back to a gun that was made and designed and built in a different era. So it's not the same plug-and-play gun like the Glock is. There's certain components on this pistol that you have to assume are going to need to be hand-fitted. Right off the bat, extractor, thumb safety, and grip safety. If you buy those components, assume right off the bat they're going to have to be hand-fitted and or gunsmith-fitted to the gun. They're not a situation with like an HK or a Glock or a Beretta or whatnot where you simply take a replacement part out of the package and you put it in the gun and you're ready to go. This gun was built in an era where hand fitting was the norm, and it was understood I may have to take this component and do a little bit of hand fitting in order to get it to function properly with this pistol. There's only so much you can do from a manufacturing point of view to get this pistol to be plug and play. All right, and those three components, extractor, thumb safety, grip safety, are components that you assume have to be hand fitted. I'm gonna give you some pointers along the way here in this video, in this podcast, of stuff to look out for. Not necessarily how to hand fit it, but stuff that you need to look out for if you're buying a 1911. Another thing that we've seen rise in popularity with the 1911 is other calibers. It used to be this was a 45 ACP pistol and mainly a 5-inch gun. If you deviated off of that, you ran the chance of a gun not being functionally reliable. Also a gun that could be even more ammo finicky. The good news is that code has largely been cracked. To the credit of people like Springfield and Wilson's and whatnot, they now make 1911s in commander size in 9mm that run like a champ. There's a lot better magazines on the market now. 9mm 1911s are like half the amount of guns that Wilson builds. Also, they cracked the code on how to tune the gun to work in 9mm. So when I have a class, a 1911 class, or any other pistol class, probably about half the 1911s I see in the class are going to be in 9mm. It shocks me. If you'd told me that 20 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. But now, if you see a 1911 in one of my classes, it's just as likely to be in 9mm as it is in 45 ACP. All right, now that being said, let's take this pistol and put my rack off to the side here, make sure I clear it, mag out, empty chamber. Now, this is a Vickers Elite Commander model, lightweight Commander, 9mm parabellum. A couple things I want to get right off the bat here. You want to do a little bit of a functions check or just an initial check on the pistol to make sure it's functioning correctly. So let's check the thumb safety and the grip safety. All right, so right off the bat, make sure the pistol's cleared, like I said, magazine out, empty chamber. Let's put the safety on, the thumb safety, firmly grab the pistol and pull the trigger very firmly. All right, then finger straight, take the safety off. All right, you should not have any movement of any kind with the hammer. All right, if you do, and I've seen this with some 1911s, you put it on safe, pull the trigger, take the safety off, and then you can see the hammer move slightly, or in some cases even go to half cock, or if you come up and even pull the hammer slightly and you hear a distinctive click, that means the thumb safety is not fitted correctly. It's not blocking the sear the way it should. And what's happening is when you pull the trigger with the thumb safety engaged, the sear is able to move just a little bit. And when you take the safety off, now it's either able to move farther or it allows the hammer to move a little bit. So that's one of the checks you want to do with any 1911 you buy from anywhere. You want to get it, make sure the gun's empty, put the gun on safe, pull the trigger firmly, and then take the safety off. You should not hear or feel any audible click with the hammer or any of the sear movement at all. If you do, you need to get a hold of a good gunsmith and have them check it out, or get a hold of the manufacturer. If it's a brand new gun from Colt, Springfield, Dan Wesson, whoever, get a hold of the manufacturer and tell them, hey, I've got something here I need you to sort out with the thumb safety. Now, one thing you can do if you're looking for a gunsmith around you to work on the gun, go to the American Pistol Smith Guild website and see if there's somebody around you that you could take the pistol to work on. If in doubt, call up Wilson Combat, tell them I sent them your way. They still work on other 1911s, not just the pistols they build, but they work on Colts and Springfields and Dan Wessons and you name it. You can send your pistol in and they'll check it out for you. So now, next up, grip safety. So what we do in the grip safety, you want to make sure weapon's empty, of course, safety's off, thumb safety's off, and then I want to loosen my grip so I don't depress the grip safety, and I want to pull the trigger, gun should not fire. All right? That means your grip safety is working as designed. Now, the next thing I like to check personally is to check how sensitized or how tuned the grip safety is, which means how far do I need to depress this grip safety before I can fire the gun. This could be critical if I'm carrying this gun for self-defense purposes and I have to shoot strong hand, whether it be right-handed, left-handed, or I get a poor grip on the gun, or I've dropped it, or whatever the case may be, and I pick the gun up. I need to have an idea of how much of a grip, how much of a proper grip I need to have before I can fire this gun. There's a couple ways to check this. One of my favorites is I depress the grip safety, I pull the slack out of the trigger right here, and then I release the trigger, or release the grip safety, and then release the trigger, and watch how this pops out. You see that? When we do it again. So, depress the grip safety, I take the slack out of the trigger, all right, release the grip safety, and now pull the trigger out, and you hear that click and you see that amount of movement. What that translates into, that's the distance that I have to depress the grip safety in order to fire the gun. There's another way to do it. You can make sure the pistol's empty, of course, put pressure on the trigger, then very slowly depress the grip safety, and then now release the trigger, and you see how far it popped out. That tells you that's how far I need to depress the grip safety in order to fire the gun. Good rule of thumb is I should not have to depress the grip safety any more than maximum 50% of its travel. All right, if I have to, in 1911, I have to completely firmly depress the grip safety in order to fire the gun. That's not good. I want to get that tuned. I want to get it sensitized. I want to have it to where no more than 50% of its travel has to be depressed before the gun will fire. That's called sensitizing the grip safety. And that's something that you need to check out. Like I said, get a hold of the manufacturer, get a hold of a pistol smith in your area from the American Pistol Smiths Guild, get a hold of Wilson Combat and tell them, hey, I want you to check out my grip safety and make sure I don't have to depress it too far before I can fire the gun. All right, now, we're going to take this thing and field strip it here in a minute, but before we do that, I'm going to talk you through a couple things here. One is, this gun has to have some play or some give or some slop, if you will, in the components as it cycles. And a good rule of thumb is, make sure the gun's empty. I should be able to wiggle my barrel slightly as the slide cycles. So as the slide cycles back and forth, hear that? I should be able to wiggle the barrel back and forth. Now, once I get to the point where it's getting ready to go up on the barrel lugs, that wiggle is going to go away and it's going to lock in the battery. Once again, lock the slide to the rear, ease it, slide forward, and then take your barrel and hit it, and you should have a little bit of play, a little bit of wiggle, and then once it hits the bottom lugs on the slide stop, that play goes away and locks in the battery. You essentially want that barrel to have the ability to move around and shift around slightly as the slide cycles. You don't want it to be locked in place or to be binding or rigid, because inevitably that's going to run, you're going to run into malfunctions if that's the case. Why could that be happening if it's happening in your pistol? A couple reasons. Could be it's rubbing on the inside of the slide. The actual outside diameter of the barrel, particularly in the chamber area, may be a little bit big, and it may need to be some material taken off of it. Nothing more than a little bit of a emery cloth or whatnot to get it to where it clears the inside of the slide. May also have a situation where if you're running a shock buff in the gun, you may have a shock buff that's coming apart on you or binding the barrel and keeping it from completely unlocking and coming down on the barrel bed during the functioning process. So once again, I'm going to make sure that barrel wiggles and has a little bit of movement all the way back and all the way forward on the slide. Now, let's field strip this thing. I'm going to get into a couple little details once I got it busted apart. Hey gang, Larry Vickers here. I want to give you a training tip brought to you by CCW Safe on concealed carry of a 1911. Right off the bat, this addresses one of the things that's very common in 1911 is trigger pull weight. 1911s are widely used in competition, in many cases with competition-only triggers. All right, triggers that are in the 2 or 3 pound range. My personal rule of thumb is you don't want to go lighter than 4 pounds with your trigger pull on your concealed carry 1911. Remember, under conditions of stress, your hands are shaking in the middle of the night, you got to draw the pistol out of your holster or defend yourself in your home. If you have a 4 pound trigger, it's going to feel like a 2 pound trigger. So the competition only style 1911 with a real light trigger, you want to leave it in the gun safe and the gun you're carrying on your hip, 4 pounds at the lightest in the trigger pull weight. That's a little tip for you, brought to you by CCW Safe. Hey Hey, now we're going to field strip this thing. Essentially going to take the top end off and talk you through some pointers on the inside. Now, I use what I call the Browning high power method to field strip these things. It's something that's common in the 1911 pistol smith world and in the tune 1911 world. Essentially, we don't pivot the bushing up front and take all the guts out the front of the gun. What we do is make sure the gun's clear, magazine out, and then I push the slide stop in line with the disassembly notch right here. All right, now, grab my handy dandy ink pen, and I'm going to take the slide stop and push it out like that, right? And then ease it off the front. Now with a Browning high power, you do something very similar, but the thumb safety actually locks into an additional notch on the slide to get the slide stop out. With a 1911, you have to do it on your own. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and take the slide off the front and keep my hand rolled around the bottom. All right. And then ease it out and let the spring pop into my hand, just like that. Now, at this point, I can take the recoil spring plug and bring it out the rear. You may or may not be able to do that with your 1911. If you had something like this Kimber, this is one of the Ep.1 Kimbers, which is a collector's item. It's set up like a standard USGI 1911. The recoil spring plug has got to go out the front. If that's the case, you're going to have to rotate the bushing over to roughly the 9 o'clock position in order to get the recoil spring plug out the front. In this case, with the Wilson, like a lot of the more common 1911s are made today, that's drilled all the way through. There's no little skirt back here to keep the plug from coming out the rear. It's drilled all the way through, generally because manufacturers want to have the ability to either, certain models have a full-length guide rod or allow end users to put a full-length guide rod in the gun. Now, this being the case, I can take the plug out the rear. All I got to do with this, take the barrel up out of battery, slide it forward. Now all I do is take the bushing and rotate it over here to the feeder pointing about 4 o'clock. Make sure your link's rolled forward, and now I can take the barrel out the front. That's the reason we do what I call the Browning high power method, is it minimize bushing wear in the slide. Because in this case, with this particular pistol, I'm only rotating the bushing from 6 o'clock over to 4 o'clock. Minimal movement, and that will help project the life or increase the longevity of the barrel bushing to the slide fit. Now, let's set this to the side. Here's our barrel, recoil spring guide, recoil spring. There it is, field stripped. Take you through a couple things here, gang. One is your link. As a general rule, you want to make sure your link pin right here is tight. And you want to make sure that it's not protruding out the sides of the lugs. Now, if you see a lot of the older 1911s, say World War I vintage Colts and whatnot, it's not uncommon for this to be loose and actually fall out. They didn't stake them oftentimes back then. The problem with that is, one, you could lose it in the field. As a GI who's field stripping the gun to clean it, he could lose the link pin in the field, and now he's in a world of hurt. The other thing is the way the gun is designed in the frame, this little area in the barrel bed, this channelizes the link pin and there's no place for it to go. That's why the gun will function with a loose link pin. All right. That's why you can have the older guns with loose link pins and they won't fall out inside the gun. Now, when you field strip the gun, you run the chance of losing it. In this day and age, you want to make sure this is tight and make sure it's not protruding on either side of the bottom lugs. All right. Now, link itself. The link should rotate freely. Should be no bind whatsoever. Also, look for cracks. If you have a bind on your link or a crack, it'll shut the gun down in a New York second. Back in the day when I was in Delta, we had a guy who was doing a demonstration for some senators and congressmen and whatnot, and I was there as the team leader. The guy turned and engaged some targets and he had a malfunction. Well, I finished the drill for him. All right, I was his team leader. I finished the drill. Only later did we realize that his gun shut down because the link was cracked. Now, you would think with a cracked link, as long as it didn't bust to pieces, that it would still function. Amazingly enough, this gun is very forgiving in its design, very robust, very reliable. But the one area, the one Achilles heel to this is the link. This thing right here, if there's bind on it or if it's cracked, it can shut the gun down in a heartbeat. It's essentially in a critical spot at a critical point in the gun's functioning, and if that link doesn't rotate freely, it can be a real problem. All right, now, this is a ramp barrel, which is common now, used in 1911s. Wilson's been doing this for a while now, and they're 9mm, which I'm all for. I'm a fan of ramp barrels in 1911s in calibers other than 45 ACP. In 45 ACP, you really don't have to have a ramp barrel, but in calibers like 9mm, I recommend it. In this case, I want to be able to put it in the frame, push it back, and it shouldn't really protrude into the mag well. It's, in this case, Wilson did a good job. It's flush with the magazine well. The reason you don't want it having protruding into the magazine well is because literally it can come back and impact the magazine and or the projectiles coming up out of the magazine. You want to make sure it's flush like this one or even slightly below. You don't want it overhanging into the magazine well. All right. Now, another thing we want to look for in our lug area, we want to make sure that we're not having any issues with the recoil spring guide impacting the lugs. You can see that in certain 1911s, generally full-size 5-inch 1911s, if they're not relieved properly. You can have a situation, let's say you had a gun with a high round count and you haven't changed the recoil springs like you should. You can have a situation where that recoil spring guide is impacting the lugs, raises a burr, and now the link doesn't swing freely. It can be a telltale sign because what you'll see is there'll be a couple of dings right here on either side of the lugs. Now this pistol doesn't have it, it's a brand new gun, and it's a Commander relieved properly for this. But you'll see a ding on either side, and then you can also see it on the recoil spring guide. And roughly this area here, you'll see a couple dings that correspond with that. This needs to be radiused, it needs to be that the dings need to be removed, and also you need to make sure you remove it on the bottom lug so the link will move freely. That can shut the gun down in a heartbeat because instead of the barrel unlocking and going down to the barrel bed like it should, it's only going part way, and then the link binds on those burrs, and now the gun shuts down. All right, big deal. Now, let's pick up our frame, couple things on the frame. Ejector, plunger tube. These two pieces here should be tight. This one's really critical. If you're disassembling this pistol and cleaning it, you should never have any movement on the plunger tube. The reason being is the plunger spring assembly that's housed inside the plunger tube applies rearward pressure on the thumb safety. If you have a loose plunger tube, it can actually pry out away from the frame, and this particular rearward plunger can pop over the safety and lock the gun on safe. So anytime you're cleaning a 1911, disassembling it, checking one out, having one built, customizing, whatever, you want to make sure this plunger tube is rock solid. You want to make sure that it never comes loose. If it ever comes loose on you, you need to make sure you have it staked properly where it's rock solid. Ejector, in this case an extended 9mm ejector, honest to God, it's nice for it to be tight. It should be tight, but because it's channelized in the slide, there are many 1911s around the world where a loose ejector, the gun still works perfectly fine. I've seen many in the military. There's really no place for the ejector to go. As a matter of fact, Springfield has actually built some pistols over the years where the ejector was Loctited in place, glued in place. It didn't even have a cross pin to hold it in place because they know the slide keeps it in location and the ejector can't come out. So you want it to be tight ideally. It doesn't necessarily shut your gun down. It's something you want to take note of. Next time you have it to a gunsmith, have them stake it, have them anchor it to make sure it doesn't come loose. But the plunger tube is the one item that you want to make sure is always super tight. Now before we put this thing back together, let's talk sights. This will be my quick little overview on my field strip. Anytime you're field stripping these guns, anytime you're cleaning them, you want to check and make sure your sights are tight. All right. One thing Wilson's done to their credit, they've done 2 hex head screws here in the rear, which is a plus, or I believe they're Torx, they're not hex. They're Torx head screws back here in the rear, which is a plus. You want to make sure that stays tight. But the dovetail front, I've seen them before in a matter of a few hundred rounds come loose. So you want to make sure that that dovetail front sight is not loose in any way. Cleaning the gun, grab it, shift it side to side, and make sure it's still tight. If it's not, you need to get that sorted out. All right? All right, gang, let's put this thing back together. I still got it in my field strip mode. You got to gave you a couple little pointers here. There's a lot more we can get into the weeds on this, and I'll be doing that in future podcasts. So I'm going to put my 1911 back together. Put the barrel bushing, goes back on. Make sure your link is rotated forward. Believe it or not, you don't have sufficient clearance on this barrel to put it back in the slide with the link in this upward position. It has to be laid forward. All right, so I put it back in, and I'm going to put it back together in reverse Browning high power procedure. That's what I call it anyway, which is common for tuned or accurized or tweaked 1911s. Barrel goes back in the battery, sets back down. Recoil spring plug comes in from the rear. Once again, with your 1911, depending on the one you have, you may not be able to take your plug out the rear. Standard USGI setup, you can't. There's a little skirt here. It has to go out the front. In this case, it can go out the rear. Now, I take my link, lay it back. I want to go ahead and recoil spring. There's an open end here, and then there's a closed end. The closed end is the one you generally use. To be honest with you, it'll work either way. It's not the end of the world. But the reason you use the closed end is because this will stay as a unit when it comes out. It won't fall to two pieces when you use the other end where it comes off. You use the closed end, it basically stays as a self-contained unit. Link's rolled up. I take my recoil spring. I want to put it down in. And then what I do is kind of take my fingers in this format and guide it down into place. Now, this is a piece of cake with a 9mm and a much lighter recoil spring. With a 45 ACP and a heavier recoil spring, this can be a little bit more of a challenge, and it's going to take some practice. Now, I'll go ahead and rotate my link down like that. Pick up the frame. Make sure the safety's off. All right, the safety has to be off and the hammer cocked. If not, I have the safety on, it'll hit the rear of the slide as I bring it back. And if you have a high-end custom 1911 like this with serrations in the rear of the slide, you'll ding the serrations, all right, which is not a good thing. Safety off, and I want to go ahead and guide the frame onto the slide or slide onto the frame, and then go ahead and just kind of have the frame push my thumb out of the way, and it'll stay self-contained like that. Now, one thing I do, a little trick from your Uncle Lair, I'll go ahead and pop the slide a little bit, and that generally will get the link in the proper position. Now, I grab the pistol like this, pull the slide back into the proper position right here, that half moon cutout that you see, and I take the slide stop and then start it through the side. Now, here's one. This is why you tune in, gang. I take my ballpoint pen, I come in through the ejection port, and I'm going to depress on the plunger right here and pop it into place. You can also use a punch or whatever you need to. That way you're not leaving that telltale scar on your frame sliding the slide stop into position. While we got it here, let's go ahead and do a functions check. Pistol's cleared, of course, safety on. Grab the gun and depress the grip safety, attempt to fire, weapon should not fire. Safety off, release the grip safety, attempt to fire, weapon should not fire. Now, grab the grip safety, safety off, pull the trigger, weapon should fire, hold your trigger to the rear. Cycle the slide, release the trigger, should hear and feel an audible click, and then also pull the trigger again, weapon should fire, good to go. Now, last thing we gotta check the disconnector. Disconnector is a little turtle head that pops up out of the frame that disconnects the sear from the trigger. All right, so it allows the sear to reset and grab the hammer hooks. What we do is we push the barrel just slightly out of battery, just enough for the barrel to drop out of battery, just like that, and then attempt to fire. If it doesn't do that, then your disconnector is working properly. If you grab your 1911 and you push the slide back like this, and it drops the barrel out of battery, and then you pull the trigger and the hammer goes down, you need to address the disconnector. Generally, the disconnector at that point is going to need to be replaced because dimensionally it's incorrect. All right, now, see two other pistols on the table here. What are these about? I wanted to point out a couple different features here that you see on these that you don't see on my Wilson Combat Vickers Elite. One is external extractor over here. This is a Pistol Dynamics Paul Liebenberg custom build. Waited a long time to get it. Very nice pistol. He uses his own proprietary slide and frame that he has made to his specifications, and he uses an external extractor right here. that you see commonly in your Smith & Wesson 1911s and whatnot. Also, you see them in many other auto-loading pistols like your HKs and your Berettas and your SIG and whatnot. In the 1911, it's not widely used. It was somewhat of an afterthought in the 1911, and it kind of has been hit or miss. On some pistols, it's been great. On other pistols, Kimber tried it, kind of their version of a Glock extractor, and didn't really work out very well, so they went back to an internal extractor right here that you see on this 1911 as well as this Kimber. The thing about these external extractors, the great thing about them, once they're set up, generally they're good for life. But from my experience, these things are either good to go when you buy them brand new or they're not. There's really no tuning to them. If you have one of them, like one of the ones from Smith & Wesson, and it's good to go, generally you're set up just fine. If not, you probably have to send it back to the manufacturer. Now, flipping over here to the Kimber. This is one of the Det.1 Kimbers. All right, USMC marked. Pretty rare gun, very valuable gun. Couple things on it. Ambi Safety. Notice this particular pistol doesn't have an Ambi Safety. This one doesn't have an Ambi Safety. This one does for left-handed use. This one has an Ambi Safety that captures the right side vis-a-vis a dovetail hammer pin. All right. A lot of other thumb safeties or Ambi thumb safeties has a little tab that goes under the grip. Armand Swenson is the pistol smith back in the day that popularized that. Now it's common when you see with other manufacturers, whether it be Kimber here or Wilson Combat, they'll use a dovetail hammer pin. It's a far superior setup, especially if you're a left-handed shooter and you're using that safety primarily. You want to have it where this side safety lever is anchored in the gun much better than a tab that simply goes underneath the grip. All right, so as a general rule, if you see safeties along this line where the profile is similar to this and it doesn't have a tab going under the grip, it's retained in some form or fashion, whether by a sear pin or a dovetail sear pin, or in this case, a dovetail hammer pin. In addition, one thing I want to show you here that you notice I don't have here on my Wilson Vickers Elite or the Liebenberg Pistol Dynamics gun here is the Allen-headed grip screws. Not a big fan of these. A couple reasons why. One, they take a special tool, takes an Allen wrench in order to get them out of the gun. So that's number one. The other issue, is even bigger issue, is the way they're designed. The cut for the Allen head wrench is much deeper in the grip screw than it is the slot on the slotted grip screws that you see on these two pistols. So it's not difficult to over torque these and snap off the head. All right, so as a general rule, I'm not a fan of Allen head grip screws. That's why when you see the signature guns, that the Vickers Elites that come from Wilson Combat, they had slotted head grip screws. They don't have the Allen heads like that. So a little bit of an overview on the 1911. Here's my recommendation if you're thinking about looking into one. One, you got to define your budget. How much money am I willing to spend? Not a cheap gun. It's not a cheap gun to manufacture. I would tell you, you need to be willing to spend at least $1,000. If you're willing to spend $1,000, then you can start going down the path of a 1911. A couple good brands to look at that price point or slightly below would be Colt and Springfield Armory. They have a long history of building good guns in that price point. So as a general rule, if you choose a good Colt or a good Springfield Armory, you'll end up with a good gun, and a gun that's a good base platform to customize as you move forward, or you decide, hey, I'm a big 1911 guy and I want to get this thing tweaked to my taste. Bump from there, Dan Wesson. Dan Wesson is in that realm in the teens. They're $1,500, $1,600 and whatnot. They generally build an outstanding gun at that price point, and from what I see in classes, they run very well. The only thing is sometimes they need to be tuned a little bit. Sometimes they have some sharp edges that need to be dehorned a little bit. So in the teens, say 1,000 to 2,000, look at Dan Wesson. When you go above that, you might want to start looking at not only your Wilson Combat, but your Springfield Armory Custom Shop and whatnot. Also, you can look at Les Baer and other manufacturers. I'm a Wilson Combat gun guy, but I'm not going to lie to you. These are $3,500 on up. All right, an inexpensive Wilson is $3,000. You get what you pay for. This is kind of the Porsche of the custom gun world. As a general rule, they've been in business over 40 years building custom 1911s. They know what they're doing, and their guns retain their value. So I'm a big fan of Wilson Combat, but I also know not everybody's in that price point. One thing you can do, shop your online gun broker and whatnot, legally purchase a used one. There's a lot of them out there that got 1 or 2 boxes of ammo through them. You can buy them, they're like new, and you get a lot of money off of them. You can go to your custom one-man shops like my good buddy Jason Burton at Heirloom Precision or John Harrison down in Atlanta. The issue with those guys are they build great guns, fantastic pistols. They got years backlog. Anybody who's really good as a one-man shop, you're going to have to wait. So one thing you could do is put in a deposit or put your name on the list to get your dream gun built by one of those guys or somebody else. And then look for, shop around for a used Dan Wesson or a Colt or something along the lines of a used Wilson Combat if that's the route you want to go. You have a lot of options. The other thing I would tell you, go to your local gun shop, indoor range, and shoot a few of them and see if you're really the kind of guy that wants to go down the 1911 rabbit hole. I'm a big 1911 guy, but I'm the first guy to tell you it's not the pistol for everybody. But there is a reason why this gun's over 100 years old, largely unchanged, other than bells and whistles on the outside of it, sights, beaver tails, grips, finishes, and whatnot. Internally, basically the same as it was designed 100 years ago by John Moses Browning. There's a reason why it's so popular. If you shoot one much, you know what I'm talking about. Hope you guys enjoyed it. First of many podcasts to come your way. I figured it was fitting to kick it off 1911 style. Once again, special thanks to Firearms Trainers Association for sponsoring the podcast. We've got more coming your way. Stay tuned. LAV out. Hey, Larry Vickers here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click here to subscribe to the Vickers Tactical channel and take time out to check out some of our other favorite videos.